All right, heading into the last hour, we gave you all the numbers that you need. So please take advantage of this opportunity to talk with Deanne Stillman. If you're a regular caller on Coast to Coast, that is to say, a couple of times a week, take a night off so we can let some other people through, especially on this topic. And she's been researching JFK and his assassination at the hands of Lee Harvey Oswald as it pertains to his mother, Marguerite, who was, if nothing short of money grubbing, after JFK's assassination. She made a cottage industry out of selling off parts of Lee Harvey Oswald memorabilia. Heck, she probably could have sold off parts of Lee Harvey Oswald if she could have gotten her hands on him. But the funeral was lame. She was a victim. She was always standing by him in his innocence, and that there's really strong evidence in this new book that he was doing all of these things which seemingly didn't make any sense. Like going to Russia and then coming back and then being involved in these public organizations in which he would wear a clapboard and walk around, and he was doing so much of this just for the same reason that he had seen her do it in her lifetime, which is to be a fame addict, which is to get people to always be paying attention to you. And we'll start there next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. The new book from Deanne Stillman is called American Confidential, uncovering the bizarre story of Lee Harvey Oswald and his mother, something that she likens unto a conspiracy in that they were both involved with each other's business, and that Lee Harvey Oswald was being essentially goaded on by his mother to do something, to become famous for something, which comes from a family tradition of feeling as though they are nothing, and that they have nothing, and that they deserve that, and that they should claim it, even if it means acting out in violence. We'll get to your questions and comments coming up on Coast to Coast AM, but before we do, we just kind of hung out a couple of different things, and I just wanted to tie them up if I could, Deanne. So his funeral was very clearly marked as something which you could not attend if you didn't know about. Even the people that were involved, like the grave diggers or the pastors, even they were kind of sworn to a kind of silence, or they were kept out of the loop entirely as to what was going on. And then it was over. Reporters were kept at a distance.
Well, no, reporters were pallbearers.
No. I think the pallbearers were the Secret Service. I think the secret.
There were some reporters who were pallbearers.
Really?
I'll double check.
Yeah, no. I thought the pallbearers it was part of their duty as Secret Service agents to keep it so private that they were forced to be pallbearers, even though they didn't want to be.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I think there were some reporters from the Fort Worth Telegram that were pressed into service, but I'll double check.
Well, you may be right, and so but regardless, it was not a big media circus. It was intended.
No, not at all. You're right. You're right. They were. It was not announced. They did not want it to turn into a media circus.
They didn't even tell the grave diggers whose grave wasn't that the famous William Bobo or something like that?
I don't know.
Yeah, they were told that it was like Robert Bobo or William Bobo. I just remember that last name because I knew somebody.
Oh, right. They gave a fake name
so that they wouldn't. So they would just dig it like they would any other kind of grave. And then,
but there were a couple of reporters from the Fort Worth Telegram. One of them is in my book. Bud Kennedy, I don't think he was a pallbearer, but he knew some people from that paper who were.
So
because they were just there.
Yeah. So then Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, his wife, and the kids.
The baby
The baby.
Maybe the toddler, the baby, the 2-year-old, and then the baby that Marina had just had, and his brother, Robert.
Were the only ones that were present.
That's right.
Yeah. But then afterward, I mean, almost immediately afterward, for cash, here comes Marguerite getting as much attention as she could about her son and about how he was the victim, and that they were all, oh, woe is me. Let me tell you this story here. It's going to cost you $2,000. Oh, woe, she would find a way for her to profit.
That's right. She found a way for her. She found her moment in the sun. She became famous.
Okay. So this idea, this pursuit of fame and recognition, did she at least feel like that he was famous? Did she recognize his fame in the end? If that's what she was encouraging him to do with his life, did she at least acknowledge the fact that he had done this awful but amazing thing, or been involved with it, depending on how you look at it?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I've come across any statements from her saying exactly that. But as I mentioned earlier, she did say that my son's a hero and he should be buried in Arlington Cemetery because he put JFK out of his misery.
Right. Let's bring in Rich.
Addison's disease. That's what she was referring to. So Rich, it was kind of an acknowledgement, in a strange way, that Lee had killed JFK.
He had done something great, in short.
That's right. He had performed a service for the country, and he deserved a hero's burial.
Rich is on a wild card line from Redwood, California, on Coast to Coast for D.N. Stillman. Go ahead, Rich.
The James D. Eugenio is an outstanding authority on the JFK assassination. He makes it very clear that the Zapruder film shows that Lee Harvey also never even fired a shot, because there are two shots there that are shown to come from the front, and the Warren report got it dead wrong. They claim it was from behind. So the headshot and the next shot come from the front.
Yeah, I don't think there's any.
Harvey was inside the building. How in the world could he have been shooting from the front?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that the Warren report is flawed, and that, especially depending on what your historical or what position you take in terms of the ballistics of it, I don't think there's any doubt. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago when we had on an expert to talk about the new discovery in the bullet theory. But I think this is fair to say. No one's asking about the Zapruder film yet. Where was Marguerite Oswald the day that Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK, or was involved in some form or another the assassination?
She was at her own house. I forget exactly. I think she was living in Fort Worth then. I'm not positive, Fort Worth or Dallas, but she was at her own place. Marina Oswald had been staying with Ruth Payne of Mrs. Payne's Garage fame, and because Lee and Marina had been estranged for some time, Ruth had invited Marina Oswald to move in with her at a suburb of Dallas called Irvine, I think. Ruth had met the Oswalds at a party for Russian expatriates, or a party thrown by Russian expatriates, and she immediately befriended Marina, and because she was a lifelong Quaker, Ruth, she felt that she was mandated by her religion to offer a helping hand to anyone in need. And when Marina expressed her feelings about her marriage to Lee and told Ruth about all the trouble they were having, and that, she indicated she needed a place to live, and Ruth offered her own house. And that's the place where, and Lee would visit on weekends. Lee kept his own place in Dallas, and that's the place where he was storing his rifle, unbeknownst to Ruth.
Where was Marguerite on the day that that Lee Harvey Oswald was shot in the stomach on television? Was she watching?
It's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, all right, we'll go to Donald, who's in L.A. on Coast to Coast AM with a question for D.N. Stillman, who's been investigating Marguerite Oswald and the way in which her relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald may be more central to his motivations than people realized, whatever those actions were. Donald, go ahead.
They say in crime, lack of a father figure is the predominant factor.
Yeah.
So I want to ask her about the father, but first I want to say this. The lack of a father in a man's life contributed to the murder of John Lennon. Stephen King had no father.
All right, stop right there. You're nuts.
But I agree.
Yeah, I know. This guy calls in all the time and calls from different places and lies to get on the air to talk about Stephen King.
I see. But it is in my book, the problem of single mom households. By the way, my parents were divorced too, so I'm not maligning single moms.
Right.
And there are plenty of examples of people who do well with having been raised by a single mother. But Lee Harvey Oswald is not in, and it was well known while he was growing up that not having a father in the house was a problem.
And I think that's a key problem for him. Obviously,
It was a key problem for him, and his older brother Robert spoke of it frequently. That
without a father figure, not just a father, but a father figure, there was nothing to balance out Marguerite Oswald's insanity.
That's right. When she was married briefly to a guy named Edward Ekdahl, I think that was his name, and Lee evidently fared pretty well while he had this father figure in the house.
Right.
And they used to go on road trips, and he would take Lee and Marguerite and the other kids to the movies and out for ice cream and so on. And Lee really sparked that. And
I think it would be fair to say, although I don't remember you mentioning it, but I mean, I think here's a case where maybe she's a father repellent. Like a lot of people who have these, a lot of narcissists, a lot of people who are aware of their own shortcomings or the fact that their relationships don't last. They have quick romances and then marriages that come pretty easily with a lot of promise, and then they just blow up because that person really isn't designed for a marriage. Would that fit Marguerite?
That's true. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. So, here's a boy who desperately wanted a father figure. Did he ever get one? I mean, like a real father figure.
Just Edwin or Edward Ekdahl. That was it. During Marguerite's 1 or 2 year marriage to Ekdahl, that was his father figure. And then his older brothers were father figures. And
I guess, yeah.
They tried to help him as much as they could, and he followed.
Wanted them into the service.
The military, and he really admired Robert and tried to kind of take after him in certain ways.
What? There was no responsibility, obviously, that was expressed by Marguerite for, I'm sorry you're growing up under these circumstances. She was still a victim. These men were all losers, or however she would frame it, so that she always came out as the person who was had been wronged, and then would pass along that sense to Lee Harvey Oswald psychologically.
That's right. The dice are loaded, and the world owes me a living, basically, and the dealer works for the house, kind of thing.
Right. And so Lee Harvey Oswald then has this famous encounter with a general. You mentioned it earlier too. Obviously, if we look at how he escalates, it's fairly classic along the serial killer line, that it starts with animals and then moves up to people who, they're taking the grievances out against the world. Usually that's a bully, but then it moves on to other things. So talk about the general.
Yes, there was this famous or infamous general named Edwin Walker, very right-wing fellow who lived in Dallas and who had come out against segregation when JFK was president. And as you know, and as many people in your audience will know, JFK was a great champion of integration, and there were riots across the country at the time of JFK's presidency over integration of schools, and General Walker was leading the charge in a lot of ways against integration in Texas and in the South, and a lot of people blame him for inciting the riots at the University of Mississippi when it was integrated. Which led to, I believe it led to some deaths there, didn't it? At any rate, there were, the very violent riots across the South, and so Walker was, front and center in the news then, and attracted Oswald's attention for some reason. No one knows exactly why, and as you mentioned earlier, Oswald's political views were all over the map, but it was just the idea that there was a prominent person. What if Oswald had, in fact, killed him?
Right.
It would have been a ticket to fame for him and a way of probably getting himself killed. Again, a suicide by the assassination of a prominent person.
Is Marguerite on the record about the General Walker case?
I never saw any comment from her about that, but I couldn't say for sure.
Yeah. I went looking. I couldn't find anything after reading that. I was like...
That's a good question.
I was kind of curious. And then, so here now, Lee Harvey Oswald has, he's dead. And Marguerite takes over the position of being what we might call the keeper of the bones. Was there any competition between her and her daughter-in-law for control of the image of Lee Harvey Oswald? Was there any, Marina needed money too. So stand by. We'll get to that coming up next. Also, we'll give you the numbers again so you can join in the conversation that we're having with Deanne Stillman about Lee Harvey Oswald and his mother on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. So Deanne Stillman, author of this new book about Lee Harvey Oswald and his mother, Candace in Racine, has a question or a comment for Deanne. Go ahead, Candace.
I'm so glad to speak to you. I heard your very, very first shows when you first started there.
Oh, good.
I was
long time ago
and listening. Yeah, and you've done fantastic.
Thank you.
You were a little nervous in the beginning, but you've done great.
It was a little intimidating, I have to say. It's funny.
They gave you the toughest shows, and you just handled them like a champ.
I loved that. Was my favorite part of those early years on Coast, where they would throw these shows at me and were like, "Really?" And they'd be like, "Yeah, try it out."
And it trained you well.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Your question or comment for Deanne? Go ahead.
Yes. I used to look into this a little between 40 and 50 years ago, but I remember a lot of what she has mentioned. But when Lee Harvey was arrested, remember he was shocked that he had been arrested for the assassination and wanted to speak to the FBI immediately. But before he could get the chance to do it, he was killed. So we don't know why he was there. That's still a big question. Why was he up there? And I'm thinking, someone may have told him, protect the president. If you see, we know you're a good shot. If you see anybody, any guns, shoot that person. But we all know now today more about how, false flags, that kind of thing.
Well, let's go ahead and get an answer to that. I'm kind of curious. What do you think about that, Deanne?
I didn't quite get the question.
Well, she's saying, why was he even up there? How could he have been involved? And that after he had been captured in the movie theater, he wanted to talk to the FBI. In some ways, after, hearing your material, my question becomes, why didn't he try to immediately turn around and milk this for the media and make money off of it?
Well, I think, again, as I said earlier, it was a suicide by assassination. He knew it would make him famous, and it did, obviously. But I think he certainly was smart enough to know that he was going to be killed in the process.
He wanted to be John Wilkes Booth.
That was part of going down in history.
Yeah.
And remember, as I was talking about earlier, I find it quite interesting that he was working at the Texas Book Depository, and his job was packing up books about American history for elementary schools.
Sure. Candace, Candace, does that answer satisfy Candace?
Well, I wanted to comment also about Russia. When he defected to Russia, and I know this sounds a little odd, but yet in line with what she's talking about tonight. But I think he went there and decided when he got there, this will be a good way for me to get a wife without my mother's interference.
Oh,
who
funny.
wouldn't have approved of anyone, and
Yeah.
bring someone back who couldn't speak the language. He never tried to teach her to speak English either.
That's a really interesting theory that he goes there, gets a Russian wife because he knows it'll jam up his mother.
Right.
Yeah, I've never thought about that, Candace.
He didn't want Marina to speak English. It was one way of controlling her.
And it was one way of keeping her away from his mother from controlling her.
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think ultimately that was hers.
Yeah, he really wanted to keep her in the dark in a lot of ways.
Ruth is in Maryland on Coast to Coast AM for Deanne Stillman.
Hi, Ian and Deanne. Thank you so much for taking my call, and I just want to tell you that this is very, very interesting. Thank you, Deanne, for all this information, because I always thought that he was innocent, but I never really knew that much about him. And especially what you said about the animals, him being sold to animals, that really shocked me. And in fact, I was kind of wondering, did he have any pets during his life? And
I never thought about that.
I actually have a cat named after him.
He had dogs as a little boy, and at one point gave one of the dog's puppies to a neighbor, and I think it was a way of trying to maintain contact with this neighbor.
Go ahead, Ruth. I know you weren't done. Go ahead, Ruth.
Oh, I was going to say, after hearing all this, I have a cat that is named after him. I think I better change the name. Change it from Ozzy Oswald to Ozzy Osbourne, maybe.
Ozzy Osbourne is better.
Or Oswald the cat.
Thank you so much. It's a very good program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate that. And Christian is in Tennessee on Coast to Coast AM. Christian?
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Thank you for taking my call and your guests. I heard a recent thing on the Lex Friedman podcast about the RFK statement about it in our his you know I'm talking about the guy running.
No, I don't. I know about RFK, but what's the statement you're referring to?
Well, he's talking about that it was a total conspiracy.
Oh, Sirhan?
Yeah, and stuff like that. He said. I mean, he has first-hand information about his father and his uncle. So I just wondered if anybody had any information on that. No conspiracy theory here. I was just trying to see if I could learn a little something. And
yeah. Well, you know what? Actually, I have a different way of asking your question, Christian, if you don't mind. And that's, Deanne, it would be very interesting to see research that connected people like Lee Harvey Oswald and their parents to the crimes that they commit. How does that parallel?
Well,
I mean, like
Sirhan,
did he have a similar relationship with his mother? Did are other people in history that are known assassins? Did they also have a difficult relationship with their mother? Is that an indicator?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, Ian. That is a good question. I mean, fictionally speaking, the Joker, in the movie, played by Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Phoenix had a very troubled, scenario with his mother.
Right. Well, that's the part. Yeah, I mean, actually, now that I think about it, I mean, there's any number of different fictional characters that speak of the mother and how their mother, profoundly negatively impacted their lives and helped to form them, and that they've been working out anger toward their mother. But that's not what your book is alleging. It's not a matter of anger toward mom. It's being involved in this sort of fame race that he was always trying to impress his mom, even if it meant doing something really awful, because he hoped, or at least the plan was, that she would see that and she would be satisfied that if nothing else, as you mentioned earlier, he had done something historic, he had done something which some people consider to be heroic, that he had brought honor to the family name by killing a president, not Kennedy in particular. It wasn't anything driven by political animus, but any president at all, any popular figure at all.
I think I agree with most of what you're saying, but not any president. JFK was an American king.
Well, okay.
And I think that Marguerite viewed herself as a serf and her family as serfs. So it was kind of in the cards that Lee would take down a king.
But I would say that title of that it was also applied to Kingfish, right? Or it would apply to General Walker, or it would apply to a lot of people.
That's true. There's the Walker that he would take down a famous or a person of import. But
right.
As it turned out, he did end up taking down a king.
Right, in that sense, and I totally get that. But, I mean, I wonder whether that would have been any different if he had gone after Eisenhower, or later on he had taken out Richard Nixon or something like that.
In my book, I talk about the fact that he seems to have fantasized about taking out Eisenhower when he was a teenager. Eisenhower was in New Orleans, and he was part of Mardi Gras one year, and Oswald was running around with guns at that point. Not that he would have been able to pull something like that off as a teenager, but he did fantasize about taking out Eisenhower. And then he did tell Marina that he wanted to kill Nixon.
So I think right there is an indicator of that when you're a fame addict, anything that will get you to be famous, it could be a crime of opportunity. It just so happened to be he didn't have to travel anywhere. He lived in Dallas. He didn't have to go anywhere.
Right.
So it kind of came to him, however much he was involved.
Kennedy went right past the window,
right?
His window at the book depository.
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to say that he was the only one involved or that he wasn't a patsy or wasn't, because certainly that's what he claimed, and that's what his mother claimed in building this case of innocence or victimhood. I'm just merely saying, isn't that interesting that he didn't have to fly to Maryland to do it? He didn't have to go L.A. to do it. That it was a crime that just washed up on his. Really, it was easy pickings off the beach. Scott is in Roanoke, Virginia, on Coast to Coast. Scott.
Yeah. How you doing?
Hi. Good. You're talking to Deanne Stillman.
Yes, I don't think Lee Harvey Oswald shot anybody. I
may not have.
Set up. What's that?
He may not have. Yeah, we're not really getting into that. But go ahead. You wanted to say it?
Well, I think I agree with her premise that the mother, he wanted, or his mother might have made him want to be somebody famous or do something great. And I think There's too much stuff with him working with Guy Bannister with the FBI. He was somehow working for the government, and I think he might have thought he was in there going to help stop the assassination, and he knew about it because he had a girlfriend in New Orleans that knew about it ahead of time. So
well, hold on a second. There's a difference between working for the government. I don't think he was working for the government. I think he was working with people who were associated with anti-government groups. And Guy Bannister was certainly that. I mean, he was retired FBI. He was retired. He was a guy who was a pot stirrer, and he got involved in that. But I think that fits your point, though, that he wasn't. It doesn't really matter whether, for the purposes of this conversation about his mother, it doesn't really matter. He was involved in, fair play for Cuba on one end. And, supposedly trying to get to Cuba and having been a former Russian citizen for a period of time. And he was also working for Bannister. It didn't really matter. He was just doing anything. He wasn't connected to any one particular ideology. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, but back then, nobody could just go to Russia and then just waltz right back in here.
Well, that's the big mystery. Like, why did they let him do that? Deanne, do you have a thought on that?
With the government, either the CIA or the...
yeah, but there's other explanations. That's one of them.
There were other defectors then. Obviously, nobody as notorious as Oswald, but there were other defectors at that time. Don't forget there were, the Communist Party was kind of active here in the U.S. then, and wasn't that big of a deal to go to Russia then. There were a lot of people who sympathized with the Russian Revolution and so on. To my way of thinking, it's generally floppiness and Keystone Cops, which explains a lot of things that appear to be mysterious to people. And I say that as somebody who's looked into a lot of strange.
Yeah, but I do think it's fair to say that it's unusual that he went there and then came back so fast. But that also, I think that you could just make the argument right there that that's just because we wanted information. We didn't have enough, human intel. And so getting him back to the United States might be a chance to debrief him and figure out what he was able to learn and bring back a Russian wife. I don't know. No?
Well, there could be, but I mean, whatever the reason was from Lee's point of view, it all backfired because it didn't make him famous. We wasn't able to sell his book. Nobody was waiting for him, when he debarked in Fort Worth to meet his brother. It just wasn't working out for him. And then he ended up...
And he didn't get anything from his mom, which, according to your book, that would have been maybe the underlying principle behind all of it, is the attention
That's true, and it didn't really garner approval from his mom.
Yeah. Or for that matter, disapproval, which is even weirder. West of the Rockies, Carlos is in Hawaii. He gets the last thought on this, but you got to be fast, Carlos.
Ken, aloha.
Aloha.
There is evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill President Kennedy.
Of course not.
The evidence is classified, but I'm going to give you two factors. One is a film that's called the Nixon film, which was taken from the other side of the street, facing the Texas Book Depository building, and it clearly shows Lee Harvey Oswald standing in front of the building at the time the limousine passed. Furthermore...
Okay, but A, I'm out of time. B, it's really not the topic. But I agree with you that that part is very murky, which is why we were staying away from it and just talking about him and his mom and the new book from Deanne Stillman. You can link up to her through coasttocoastam.com. American Confidential, uncovering the bizarre story of Lee Harvey Oswald and his mother. First hour was Richard Dolan. To Jason the horse and the people who will always miss him, like me, I think there's something to be said for saying a prayer on his benefit. And so thank you so much for all the kind words I've been hearing on Twitter, at Deacon Pundit. Thank you so much, too, for Ryan Stacy and for Michael Casio putting it all together at the last minute. Deus te, Deus te mat. I do, too.